We continue to work on the facade of a single-family building. The stage of applying insulation layers and protecting sensitive areas of the building has finished. Further works will involve strengthening the insulation layer and applying a thin coat of plaster. Works on finishing rustication strips will also be performed. The investor decided to use the set of materials for thermal insulation within the ETICS system of the MajsterPol company. This has guaranteed the compatibility of the materials, which translates into their improved efficiency, absence of defects, and makes the works faster and easier. The first stage of the reinforcement works involves studding of walls. It provides additional reinforcement in the areas particularly exposed to wind. In the case of buildings with weakened foundation or buildings higher than 12 meters, studs taking the load are a necessity. Studding can be initiated 3 days after insulating boards have been fixed. The decision of whether and how to use mechanical connectors belongs to the designer. It is advisable to use 4 studs per 1 square meter in the central part of the wall and 6 connectors at the building edges. There are 2 methods of fixing mechanical connectors. The first method involves cutting out a round outlet in the styrofoam so that the stud can be placed in it at adequate depth. Once the stud has been knocked into the wall, the small plastic plate is to be closed with a styrofoam ring. It is important for the ring to be harmonizing with the wall surface. The second method involves mounting the connector directly on the styrofoam surface. It is important that the stud does not protrude above the surface of the insulation material. The stud should not be knocked too deep into the styrofoam. The resulting cavity is filled with the STYROLEP Z adhesive mortar. Now it is time to construct the layer reinforcement netting, which will serve as protection of the insulation layer and a solid base for the plaster. The role of the netting is to carry the loads resulting from heating and quenching of the facade. The netting is also protection against mechanical impact. The STYROLEP Z adhesive mortar for immersing the mesh netting is applied onto an even and clean surface. The content of the mortar has been enriched by the producer with 2 types of fibre, forming a micro-reinforcement. Owing to this, the adhesive mortar prevents the creation of cracks or scratches on the surface of the facade. The enhancement of the strength of the STYROLEP Z mortar also improves its elasticity. The mortar is applied from top to bottom with stretches of the width of the reinforcing mesh. Next, characteristic gouges are formed with the use of a notched trowel, so that a uniform layer of the adhesive can be applied. A cut-to-length strip of the mesh netting is immersed in the mortar, and then it is completely covered with the second layer of the adhesive mortar. The surface of the strip requires precise smoothing. At this stage, it is important for the fibre to be invisible and not to come into direct contact with the styrofoam boards. Neighbouring strips of the mesh are placed with a 10 cm overlap joining, making sure the joining does not coincide with the joints between the boards. The primer has been selected to match the type of plaster to be applied onto the wall. The colour of the under-plaster MajsterPol primer is similar to the colour of the applied plaster. Priming of the reinforcing layer before plastering is a necessity often disregarded by contractors, although it fulfills many important functions. First of all, it increases roughness of the surface, making it easier to spread the plaster over the facade. Reactions that occur between the primer and the plaster make the process of binding and drying of the plaster mass run in a smoother and even way. In addition, the mortar evens the absorption of the surface and prevents discoloration or stain formation on the surface of the facade. Plastering can be initiated 24 hours before priming. The investor decided to use the silicone sheep fleece MajsterPol plaster. The plaster has a microporous structure which enables transport of water vapor and gases. Highly valuable components combined with nanotechnology make the MajsterPol plaster one of the products of the highest quality. In addition, the plaster contains coating biocide, a fungicide and algaecide substance which significantly reduces and postpones the risk of microorganisms appearing on the facade. A thin layer of plaster should be applied to the wall with a smooth stainless steel trowel. The mass should be carefully distributed and its excess removed on a regular basis. The texture is obtained by rubbing the plaster with a smooth plastic trowel. The sheep fleece structure is obtained by rubbing the plaster in circular motions. Accuracy and carefulness are the key issues during plastering works. Taking care of details influences not only the appearance of the building facade, but also its quality and durability. Once the silicone plaster has dried, the masking tape can be removed from window battens. The facade is almost finished. Now you just need to paint the rustication strips. It is time to sum up. The aim of the works was to perform the reinforcing, protective and decorative layer. After insulating the building walls, it was time to perform the reinforcing layer. The fibreglass mesh was immersed in the STYROLEP Z adhesive mortar, which was enriched with fibres for even better strengthening and reinforcement of the insulation layer. The next layer is the under-plaster MajsterPol primer, the base properly adjusted to the silicone plaster. Its task was to expedite and optimize the process of binding and drying of plaster, as well as to improve the plaster mass grip. The last layer of the facade is the silicone sheep fleece MajsterPol plaster with a vapor-permeable microporous structure. The plaster was properly protected against adverse external conditions, including wall fouling by microorganisms. The last step, once the plaster is dried, is to finish the works connected with painting of the rustication strips.